Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday. We had a tutorial last week, and you know what that means? Today, it's time for another episode of Let's Chat.
This is 0612 TV.
Welcome aboard.
Hello YouTube, and welcome to this vlog show that I finally decided on a name for. So, let us jump right in. Now, 2 weeks ago on my first episode, I talked about a question I got a lot, which of course concerns my camera. A lot of people have been asking me what are the best settings for my camera. Today, I'm actually going to move on to the most asked question in one particular series of videos, and that is my logic gate series of videos. So really, today's video actually serves a dual purpose. First of all, we actually want to answer the particular question, that is, why is there no episode 7? That is the episode on NOR logic. But in order to answer that question, I'm going to actually bring you on a roundabout route, talk about history, and then we'll get around to answering that question. So today I actually want to talk about my particular insight into learning and education. Now, if you think back to the days when you were in primary school or secondary school, well, that's what we call it here. I think it's elementary school and middle school for you guys in the US. At any rate, when you're at a lower level of education, what tends to happen is you are shown this is a question, and this question has an answer. And this formula is actually pretty irrefutable. 1 plus 1 equals 2, there's no question about that. There is the one and only answer that is definitely correct. After thinking of education in this particular way for such a long period of time, what happens is essentially your brain starts to believe that that is basically how everything works. It's kind of firmly lodged into my brain that basically if you have a question or a problem of some sort, the way you want to get to the end of it is to actually basically solve it using a set of steps, and you will get at an answer. And the problem is, when such an idea is lodged so firmly in your head, when things don't work that way, you get really confused. I remember in secondary school I had a lot of problems actually trying to wrap my head around quadratic equations. Equations in this particular form, which then you factorize like this, and then there are two answers. It actually took me the longest time to actually bring myself to accept that there are two answers, they are both valid, and you have to state both of them to get a question correct. It was a concept so foreign to me that I just didn't feel like it was something that, really worked. And that is actually my biggest obstacle in learning. No, not quadratic equations, but things that didn't actually fit the formula that I kind of grew accustomed to. As I move on to the university level, I started doing things like discrete math. We had to work with predicate logic, do things like proofs, and that was when I actually found my biggest fear when it actually came to learning, and that is, there are some things that you can't actually just get the question, do a certain bunch of steps, and get the answer. Instead, there are some things where you just have to think, you just have to look at the question, just stare at it, and then the answer jumps out at you. That is, of course, in the ideal case. In my case, I would stare at it for 10 minutes and then move on. You see, it turns out that, especially for some of the logic-related stuff, really there are certain steps where you have to just stare at it, and you actually have to use some kind of intuition to decide what kind of steps you want to take to actually get to the end of the proof. Now, that is something that isn't easy and definitely did not fit into my formula of, input, processes, and outputs, just like a computer, I guess. And to tell you honestly, to this date, this is something that I really have a lot of trouble dealing with. And in fact, that is the answer why there is no episode 7 for the Logic Gate series. You see, in the last episode of the show where I just abruptly cut it off, we actually did NAND logic. And to very quickly recap, in case you haven't watched the series, essentially logic gates are little components capable of doing very simple processing. There are a bunch of different types of logic gates, which of course react differently to different input. The magic of NAND and NOR logic is you can actually take one type of gate, and depending on how you arrange it, you can actually get it to behave like all the other different types of gates. In episode 6, we used the NAND gate to actually try and form the different kinds of gates. And while actually teaching that episode, I realized that I really didn't have very good explanations. Now that I've actually done some university level logic type stuff, I've come to the understanding that, some of these things really rely on intuition, so it wasn't really wholly my fault when I couldn't actually explain why this particular setup created the behavior of that particular gate. But at the time, when I actually stopped the episodes, that was the reason why. I felt that there had to be a reason why, this particular combination of gates creates the effect of a different type of gate. But back then, all I could tell you was, well, that's how it is. If you look really hard, you will see that's how it works. And I've come to realize that for some proof type stuff, that really is the explanation. If you look really hard, you'll see that's how it works. Now, I'm very sure that there definitely is a better way of explaining NAND and NOR logic, better than I did in the past. But maybe there just isn't a simple way that, I have a bunch of NAND gates, and hey, applying this concept, applying this theory, that's how I get it to turn it into an XOR gate. Really, it's about just looking at it and eventually understanding that's how it works. So in short, that is the reason why I never actually completed my logic gate series, because I felt I couldn't give a rigorous yet simple to understand explanation of why things work that way when put together. Of course, having said that, I am definitely still putting in a lot of effort to actually look for ways and means to explain this better. I, of course, want to redo that series, at least episode 6, and I will, of course, wrap up the series by doing episode 7. That will, of course, not come anytime soon. I still want to be more acquainted with the ideas. I would, of course, definitely love to give, a better answer than just stare at it. But hey, at least after doing some amount of university level study, I'm prepared to accept that, in some cases, such a rigorous explanation just doesn't exist. You just have to stare at things hard enough until they make sense. And that, of course, is the answer as to why there is no episode 7 of the Logic Gate series. If you ask me whether I've given up on that series, well, in fact, my answer is yes, I have given up on it for a very long time. But now that, I have these insights, there are hopes that I can actually pick up the series and continue it from where I left off. But alright, that is pretty much all there is for this episode of Let's Chat. Hopefully you've gained some insights as to, well, the way I learn, as well as why episode 7 doesn't exist. Once again, that's all there is for today's episode of Let's Chat. If you have any comments, queries, or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Don't forget to follow the official Twitter account for this channel at twitter.com/0612TV. As always, I appreciate every like, favorite, and subscription you give me. But until next time, you're watching 0612TV.